Coming up on Cannabis Coast to Coast News this week, the industry takes the wrong kind of hit this week when DEA Judge John Mulrooney cancels future hearings on rescheduling cannabis off Schedule 1 of the CSA. Now all hope for reform in 2025 is in the new administration's hands as the transition to a Republican control of Congress is complete. Plus, an Ohio mom goes viral when she gets a bonus at a Burger King drive-thru.
Do you see that? You can't say that on here. Mary Jane.
Yes, that employee was fired on the spot, and the Burger King chain confirms his termination and condones the incident. And High Times CEO Adam Levin pleads guilty to securities fraud after a scam he orchestrated scam money from investors 4 years ago. Plus, at first you don't succeed, try again, right? Florida cannabis advocates start the process for another adult use ballot initiative for 2026. They'll face another uphill battle for a 60% approval to change that state's constitution. And a THC overdose in Washington state puts a new user in the hospital, and now he's suing the dispensary. Plus, an update on the California wildfires from the author of the Cannabis newsletter, Jackie Bryant in San Diego. All that and state reports from coast to coast on Cannabis Coast to Coast with Alaina Pinto. Next.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of Cannabis Coast to Coast News, PCM TV's production of the news from the cannabis industry from coast to coast. I'm Alaina Pinto. Another reminder that the easiest way to get access to this show is by downloading the app PCM TV on the App Store or Google Play. Just scan the QR code and it will take you there. But remember to add a space between PCM and TV in your search for the app to pop right up. Our top story this week is a continuation of the DEA's process to reschedule cannabis off Schedule 1 of the Controlled Substances Act. This time, Judge John Mulrooney put a hard stop on future hearings, blaming the DEA for delaying tactics and handpicked expert testimony from a majority of prohibitionists. Mulrooney postponed any future hearings for at least 3 months and is expecting the new administration to make changes at the top of that federal agency. In his decision, Mulrooney said this about the favoritism exhibited by the head of the DEA, Ann Milgram, saying, quote, "If true, viewed in the best light, these allegations demonstrate a puzzling and grotesque lack of understanding and poor judgment from high-level officials at a major federal agency with a wealth of prior experience with the Administrative Procedures Act." Mulrooney also added that the DEA's refusal to comply with orders was, quote, "unprecedented and astonishing." Plus, the DEA's behavior through this whole process was, again, quote, "a disturbing and embarrassing revelation." The industry had hoped these hearings would have been completed by the time the new administration takes over Congress, but the DEA's delaying tactics and less than fair handpicking of expert testimony accomplished nothing, basically thwarting outgoing President Biden's hope that this could have been done before he left office. And now, with Inauguration Day here, there's a new chief in charge in the White House, Donald Trump. With more from Washington, D.C., here's Andrew Behringer.
I'm Andrew Behringer with the Washington, D.C. report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. In a significant development for federal cannabis policy, Administrative Law Judge John Mulrooney has suspended the highly anticipated cannabis rescheduling hearings that were set to begin next week. The decision comes after allegations of improper conduct between the DEA officials and anti-rescheduling witnesses. Pro-rescheduling advocates claim the DEA conspired with witnesses opposing this schedule change, leading to what they call irrevocable tainting of the process. The allegations were serious enough that some parties sought to remove the DEA from the proceedings entirely. The case, which could potentially move cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 of the Controlled Substances Act, now rests with DEA Administrator Ann Milgram. If approved, the rescheduling would allow licensed cannabis businesses to take federal tax deductions and ease certain research restrictions. The DEA has faced mounting criticism throughout this process, with Judge Mulrooney himself describing their handling of evidence submission as unprecedented and astonishing. The agency has struggled with managing public comments and issuing proper subpoenas to DEA officials. Multiple stakeholders, including health professionals and veteran groups, have raised concerns about the exclusion from the proceedings. The Justice Department has requested a pause on regulated federal litigation until these procedural issues are resolved. While the delay creates uncertainty for the rescheduling timeline, Judge Mulrooney suggests that the appeal could prevent extensive delays in the future. The court has mandated quarterly updates on the appeal status, with participants having 15 days to file their appeals. Well, that's the DC report. I'm Andrew Behringer, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
There is some hope for the 119th Congress that is now controlled by the Republican Party. U.S. Representative Dina Titus from Nevada is going to try again to get momentum for federal reform. Of course, industry advocates have heard this before. It's why we call one step forward, two steps backward cannabis standard time. And nothing ever seems to move the needle towards rescheduling, smart banking reform, and research, or social justice. And that is what the current Congress has on its plate. And while Titus is ready to prioritize these changes, lobbyists have been hearing the same thing for years, even dating back to the first Trump presidency. Aaron Smith is the executive director of the NCIA, and PCM TV founder Jimmy Young talked with him this week about the merger of two major lobbyist groups in DC. The U.S. Cannabis Council and the National Cannabis Roundtable. Here's Jimmy and Aaron.
Hi, everyone. Welcome again to a very special edition of Cannabis Coast to Coast News, one-on-one. I'm PCM TV founder Jimmy Young, and I'm so proud to be joined by the executive director of the National Cannabis Industry Association. His name is Aaron Smith. Aaron, thank you so much for joining us once again to talk about what the heck is going on with this crazy industry.
It's always great to be here, man.
Hey, so it's a crazy week. You open up the news on Monday, and the next thing you know is Judge John Mulrooney decides, you know what? DEA's been screwing with this process for a long time. We're going to cancel these next set of hearings, and all the people that were invited are going to have to be postponed. And he says, we'll wait for the new administration. And I also thought he took some pretty fierce targeted shots at Ann Milgram, the head of the DEA, didn't he?
Yeah, indeed. And, this, I'll just say from the start, this is not a strategy that NCIA was behind or happy about by any means, but are some folks who were also on the cannabis rescheduling side of the argument did, uncovered some not too surprising information about how the DEA had been biased through the process, and felt that it was advantageous to order this appeal and thereby delay the proceedings. And so the way this works now is we're kind of in uncharted territory. We don't know exactly how long. We've got the way that it looks as though is that every 90 days that the DEA administrator needs to check in with the court and what the progress is of this, but there's no actual order of when hearings resume. So it's an unfortunate development for sure.
Yeah, and it's a setback. Let's face it, if you look at it that way. Uncharted territory is a great way to describe the incoming administration in Washington, D.C. A Republican-controlled three branches of government at this point, because he did make some appointments that are still sitting on the Supreme Court. That, of course, would be the president-elect. And actually, by the time this interview airs, he will be the president inaugurated, Donald Trump. And we all have our own political feelings about it. But at this point, we have no way to change the result. So accepting the result and working within the framework of this Republican control is going to be an interesting new challenge for all lobbyists, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. And on the back to the rescheduling front, we don't know who the DEA administrator will be. It hasn't been appointed yet. We know Pam Bondi is likely to be the attorney general there who oversees the DEA. But the concern that we have is that the way that this process works is that, yes, DEA had been, biased, but this is the DEA's administrative court. This isn't like an independent court, like a district court or, the appellate court. So the judge is in no way able to remove the DEA from the proceedings because the DEA, they're in the driver's seat. So what they've done is they've said, well, let's appeal the ruling that the DEA can't be removed, but they're appealing it to the DEA. So now, and the judge has decided, well, let's wait until the next DEA administrator is here. I think that probably the people, and also Village Farms and Hemp for Victory, which is backed by pretty much, a lot of the common names that you hear out there, the bigger MSOs, these people sometimes they tend to think that the smartest people in the room when it comes to public advocacy and policy, just because they're good at business or, because they're lucky at business, however you want to look at it. Mm-hmm. And it's unfortunate because now we're in a situation where we have a new unknown incoming administrator who would need to make this a priority to get things started in the first 100 days. As in the past, before this ruling, the new administrator would have to have made it a priority to roll things back. So now doing nothing on their part will stifle progress. As in the past, they would have had to really take an action because we would have already had a head start with the hearing. The first couple of hearings would have happened already before they came in. So we're looking at every potential way to try to get things back on track, but it's going to be a tough road.
The entirety of that interview is available on our PCM TV app and on the homepage of procannabismedia.com. In this past election, Florida voters had a chance to pass a constitutional amendment opening the market to all adults over the age of 21. Just under 57% of voters there did say yes to that question, including incoming President-elect Donald Trump, or at least he said he would. Now, the same people who drove that campaign, Smart and Save Florida, are starting their efforts for the next federal election in 2026. Over $100 million was spent on advertising for both sides of this initiative. Certainly, commercial media outlets in the Sunshine State are celebrating if that question garners as much attention and funding as the last one. Well, now let's start our state reports with Pam Chmiel in New York.
This is Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Pam Chmiel reporting from New York. Last week, the New York State Supreme Court ruled that the New York City Sheriff's Office and Office of Cannabis Management must stop conducting raids without a warrant on unlicensed cannabis storefronts. And to further complicate things, the New York City Sheriff's Office has admitted to disposing of evidence they've confiscated from these raids. And the Office of Cannabis Management has neglected to test these products to confirm they contain marijuana and not hemp, which is legal under federal law. Then there is the question of the missing money that has been confiscated from these raids and is yet to be resolved. While most people want these illegal storefronts shut down, there is an outcry over the need for due process in our legal system to avoid a war on drugs like we've experienced in the past. And a group of social equity dispensary owners who were recipients of New York State's now failed loan program is suing the state for loan forgiveness. You may remember that the Chicago Atlantic Investment Group had promised to fund these social equity business owners, but the loans came with a high interest rate and inflated licensing fees for their dispensaries. The New York partnership with the Chicago Atlantic Group began to dissolve after accusations of gross mismanagement by high-profile fund managers like basketball star Chris Webber, and why they were allowed to pay themselves over $2 million in fund fees. Lastly, New York activists are lobbying for Cannabis Health Coverage Act in the state capitol on March 11th. This would require state-funded health insurance entities to cover medical cannabis. That's this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Pam Chmiel reporting from New York.
Minnesota continues to struggle to get their new adult use market up and running, and advocates and pro-cannabis legislators had targeted this year of 2025 as the year for launch. Now lawmakers in that state have pushed that back until 2026, as all the news, rules, and regulations have to be written from scratch. Right now, the only legal way to buy cannabis in Minnesota is on tribal lands. Meanwhile, in Virginia, another adult use bill has been introduced in that state's legislature. You might remember that state passed an adult use legal bill last year only to see their governor, Glenn Youngkin, veto it. Sure enough, in his State of the Address this week, the governor there said he would veto it again if it passed the legislature. Here's our man in Virginia, Joe Parsons, with more.
I'm Joe Parsons with the Virginia Cannabis Connection, and this is the Virginia Cannabis Report on Cannabis Coast to Coast News. In 2021, Virginia was leading the way in the fight against prohibition as the first southern state to adopt not only a medical cannabis use program, but the first to legalize recreational use by adults 21 and over. Adult use sales were set to begin by 2024, but ever since Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin took office in 2022, he's been a staunch opponent to adult use and has been doing everything in his power to prevent implementing the retail market, a market that was the will of the people of the Commonwealth since 2021. Last year, he was quick to veto not only the adult use retail bill, but any other cannabis-related bill, no matter how important it was to both people with cannabis-only convictions, but also parents that could potentially lose custody or visitation rights due to use of a statewide legal substance. He even went on record with off-color jokes like, anyone who thinks I'm signing that bill must be smoking something. Delegate Paul Krizik and Senator Aaron Rouse, the two key Democrats that got last year's bill passed on both Senate and House chambers with bipartisan support, are not wasting any time to put a new bill for the 2025 session. They have decided to make only minor adjustments to the new bill, as last year's bill was well received by both parties. Delegate Krizik and Senator Rouse know how important this bill is, not only to ensure a safe and fair marketplace, but to have tested, taxable products that could in turn help decrease the increasing legacy pop-up market that is exploding in Virginia due to the lack of that adult market. Governor Youngkin, in his speech at the State of the Commonwealth address, reiterated a similar message from his veto message last spring, a message we all in the industry expected. He said, "Everyone knows where I stand on establishing a retail marijuana market, encouraging instead to focus on other issues we can find common ground on." This stance is a slight surprise in lieu of the newly elected President Donald Trump's new revised position on cannabis policy, including implementing adult use in other states, such as Florida. However, Youngkin stuck to his usual playbook by repeating his message from last year. He alleges that jurisdictions with a regulated adult use market have experienced significant negative impacts on mental health and adolescent safety. In his veto statement last year, he quoted surveys and research documents that were literally years out of date and used excuses that prohibitionists have been using to invoke fear for years. The fact is that federally funded survey data reports that teens' use of marijuana is at historically lows, especially in states with adult use laws. Studies from both the U.S. and Canada have also failed to identify a relationship between marijuana legalization and increased instances of psychiatric illness among either high-risk individuals and the general public. Virginia NORML Director J.M. Padini has pushed back on these claims and said what's actually bad for the youth is leaving the control of Virginia's marijuana market to illicit operators. While Paul Krizik and Aaron Rouse know that Youngkin will probably veto another bill once it's passed on the floor, they also know that a safe and fair marketplace is worth the effort. And while Youngkin is not able to run for a consecutive term for governor, it will set precedent to the next governor that this is an issue that we will continue to fight for and that we will not give up on. I, for one, will be following this every step of the way. So stay tuned to Pro Cannabis Media for all the latest to this story as it develops. Well, that's going to do it for this week. From the Virginia Cannabis Connection and reporting from Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Joe Parsons. Until next time, stay lifted.
That'll do it for the A block or first section of this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast news, but we have many more state reports coming up next, including the story of the Ohio mom who went through a Burger King drive-thru and got a bonus she was not expecting. The news continues after this.
If you look down in there, you can see some residue. She got her chicken fries. Chicken fries with the side of... Do you see that? You can't say that on here. Mary Jane.
Ready to take your craft to the next level? Imagine faster extractions, purer products, and more profits. Sounds good, right? At Pure 5 Extraction, we've revolutionized cannabis extraction with our game-changing technology. No solvents, no heat, just the cleanest, most natural process on the market. Whether you're a boutique grower or a large-scale operation, Pure 5 has the tools to elevate your business worldwide. Visit pure5extraction.com today. Pure 5 Extraction, because your plants deserve the best.